Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Game Informer Show. I'm your host, Ben Hanson. On this very special episode, we are Skyping in BioWare's Mac Walters, who is the creative director for Mass Effect Andromeda, and he was also a writer on the original trilogy. And we have dozens and dozens of questions from the community, and we're going to volley those his way. If you are a Mass Effect fan and this is your first episode that you've ever seen, we do these every month to go along with our cover story. So at the tail end of every month, we like to post these, get questions from the community, and kind of fill any holes that we conceivably missed. It's a time to get specific and just get little clarifications to things that we might have informed you about throughout the month. So without further ado, here's Mac Walters. Mac Walters, welcome to the Game Informer Show, sir.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a real honor to have you. It's nice to put a pin in all of our Mass Effect Andromeda coverage by having you on here and getting questions from the community to kind of fill some of the gaps that we might have missed. Because, as I'm sure you know, there are hundreds and hundreds of questions that fans have about Mass Effect Andromeda.
I had noticed it all. They're very quiet.
Have you checked Twitter lately, Mac? You might want to open it up on your phone.
Yeah, okay, I should do that.
But to kick it off, first question's from Nostromo79. He says, what does BioWare think they can improve on what didn't work in the open world in Dragon Age Inquisition? Were there areas where you thought Mass Effect Andromeda can improve upon the formula in this way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one of the things we focused on, looking at Dragon Age Inquisition, looking at games like The Witcher 3, which I think improved, on that sort of open world design, is really just sort of the quest density, but also the quest integration throughout the world. For us, it was important that, when we were building out our planets, because for us, the open world represents the planets that you go to, that each one of those planets has its own unique story. Usually that's centered around one or multiple, very important characters as well. And then as you go throughout that planet and you're exploring, it's not just a matter of, well, I got to go grind for something. I've got to go, follow these fetch quests or anything like this. Like, no, there is a story that's going to uncover and unfold on that planet, usually with a fairly epic choice involved with it. And a lot of the side quests are all intertwined in that, or they're intertwined with, the critical path of the story, the main story as well. We call them, internally, we actually call them story worlds for a reason. We want them to feel story rich. And I think that's one of the things that really will help these worlds just come alive. I mean, they're beautiful, they're gorgeous, they're fun to explore when you're driving around in the Nomad. The gameplay is exciting, but we want people to feel like there's also a purpose to them, and there's also a sense of history. One of the things I hammered home a lot with the team was, what is the story of this planet? So think about it from terms of the actual, geology and history of the planet, but also who's lived here, who isn't living here anymore, why is that? And for the people who are living there, if there are people living there, what's their story as well? And what are they trying to do on this world?
Yeah. So Infuda asks, you've talked a lot about exploration and freedom, but what exactly is out there worth finding? And is your main answer then just more interesting storylines?
I think the story is probably a huge driver for people, because you want, to me, it's, and actually, sorry, I back up on that. I'd say, one of the key things that, we've realized over the years is story is really important. But if you don't have amazing characters, it all falls flat, right? So to me, it's about the characters that are on those worlds. Sure, there's a story wrapped around them and a narrative that's going on, but really it's about, being interested in, if you go to a planet, it's not just that there's two warring factions and every time you go out you see people fighting. It's like, well, who represents those factions? Who's the leader of those? Is there something I can do to sway, the battle that's going on, so one person can be in charge? Those kind of decisions and the characters around them, I think, are key. But as far as things that you can find, the other thing is, keep in mind, this is Mass Effect, so there's a lot of mystery in our world. It's not just straight up, hey, there's minerals out there. We want, and we're going to be somewhat tight-lipped about that, because we want you to enjoy it when you play the game and sort of be surprised with it. But we want to be there to be sort of a sense of mystery. And one of the things we sort of took from the past, if you were an explorer and you were sort of a person who was sort of looking for something, call it 100 years ago, you might be in Egypt or something like that, looking for ancient civilizations and going through tombs and things like that. We want to have that kind of discovery as you're going out on these worlds and really digging up and finding out, because you're a pathfinder. You're not just someone who's a soldier. We want you to feel like you can go out there and really discover something for the first time, and we have those waiting for the player.
And imagine in your ideal world, people will finish Andromeda and then go out to a bar and argue about which planet is the best instead of arguing about which character is the best, which is what happens all the time in the basic trilogy.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. I think some people will naturally gravitate towards certain planets and certain storylines that are happening on those planets. Um, and we I think in addition to making sure that every planet has a story or a history, that it has a unique one as well. So they all balance each other out. Some are more gameplay heavy. Other ones are more story heavy. Some focus more on using the nomad. Some focus more on being on foot.
Yeah. So one of the big pieces of feedback that I saw again and again throughout our month of coverage was people saying, "Oh, it's like Dragon Age Inquisition," and a lot of people loved Inquisition. Some people had problems with, loading between zones, stuff like that. I'm wondering, just in general, what did you think about the comparison to Inquisition? Do you think it's overblown? Do you think it's less similar than fans maybe think at this point?
Well, I mean, first thing, Dragon Age Inquisition was Game of the Year, so I'll take that comparison any day.
Sure.
And they were also the first people to BioWare to sort of use Frostbite and bring our type of games to the next generation. So kudos to them for everything they did. We learned a lot from them. We borrowed as much as we could. But it's BioWare, whether it's from Mass Effect game to Mass Effect game, or from Dragon Age game to Mass Effect game, we're always trying to improve and we're always trying to get better. We heard, we took very much into account, the concerns people had about open world in Dragon Age, and we've tried to correct as many of those, whether it's making the transitions more seamless, making sure that the quests themselves are more meaningful and they're not just fetch quests, trying to avoid grinding, things like that. And I think we've come a long way in that. And keep in mind, a lot of the people who are working on this project worked on Dragon Age Inquisition. They want to improve, and they brought those learnings to this game as well.
Italian Pathfinder wants to know, they say, "I noticed many similarities between Andromeda's planets and Earth. Should we expect some more alien planets as well than what you've shown so far?"
That's a really good question. I think Mass Effect has always been grounded in reality. So you're not going to see crazy, Avatar or even No Man's Sky style planets. That's not what we were doing. We wanted to make things feel like they were grounded in a sense of usually in science and fact. That said, the promise is you're going to an alien galaxy, so we have leaned into that fairly heavily on some of the planets within the realms of trying to keep things believable. So I think what you will see are some things that both look familiar, but also very original and alien, and that is something that you will see more of.
I mean, even just something you've shown in the trailers again and again is kind of like the flying large alien creature, and that seems like something more abstract than anything in the trilogy I can think of as far as creatures go.
Yeah, exactly, and we'll see more of those, as we start to see more of the levels in the future as well.
Yeah, for sure. So Parker Woolfolk wants to know if the planets are roughly the same size as zones in Dragon Age Inquisition. Is there any way you can draw a comparison if they're smaller or larger than the zones?
Yeah, I don't want to get too much in the details, but what I will say is we built the levels with the Nomad in mind, which is a vehicle that travels at 130 plus kilometers an hour. So you can imagine what that means for the size of our levels. It also changes the way that we approach things like density and just the types of gameplay that we put on the levels. In Dragon Age, you were either walking or on your horse going everywhere, and the horse was arguably not that much faster. So everything was sort of paced and paced out similarly. On the planets that we have areas which are very clearly meant to be, nomad driving sections where you don't want, dense trees in your way. You want to be able to go as fast as you can, use some of the features like, we showed it very briefly we showed it in the gameplay trailer, but, the Nomad has other features. It has a boost and it has a jump, and it has some other things that we're going to actually reveal fairly soon. And we want that experience to be fun and enjoyable as well, but also challenging. The Nomad can be damaged, and I mentioned in the video in the voiceover, there are hazards on these planets. Some of them are global hazards, some of them are local hazards, and they can damage both you and the Nomad. And the last thing you want is to be driving out somewhere, destroy your Nomad, and have to walk back. So
right on.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that it's a younger crew overall, but Molly39 wants to know, Sarah and Scott Ryder, how old are they?
Imagine, I'll say this, I'll say mid-20s. Let's call it mid-20s. I don't want to get into specifics right now, but we really want this to feel like they aren't inexperienced completely, but this is really their first big adventure that they're going on. And I've mentioned before that this was really more so than the trilogy. This is a story of people going on that first adventure, bonding together, and becoming a hero. Again, Shepard was very much a hero when you met them, and then went on to be a legend. The writers are really, this is their opportunity. This is their big chance.
Yeah, and Liam's around that same age too.
Yeah, I mean the squad mates sort of have a similar vibe, but we didn't use. We wanted the experience to feel youthful and adventurous. That didn't restrict us. Obviously we have Asari, we have Krogan. We've seen both of those. They are more long-lived, so maybe comparably, some of them are similar age, but they're obviously going to be much older as well.
Gotcha. Italian Pathfinder has a really specific question, which is what I love this podcast for. He's wondering, or she's wondering, how are the people going to call our protagonist in Andromeda? For example, if I decide to use the default name of Sarah Ryder, are they going to call me Sarah? That'd be great. Or should I expect to be called Pathfinder like Inquisitor was in Dragon Age Inquisition?
So if you maintain your default name, then obviously we will use that name, Sarah or Scott Ryder, and then we use everything from Ryder, hey Ryder, to hey Pathfinder, if it's less formal, or hey you, that works.
Joe Johnny 17 says, will anything you've done in the original trilogy have an impact on Mass Effect Andromeda, or is it a completely clean break?
It's a completely clean break. Obviously, there will be hints and nods for fans to see things that they're familiar with, but it's not necessarily. We've tried to take things from canon as opposed to take things that would have involved choice or decision from the trilogy, because really we wanted this to feel like a fresh start for players, and also for new players. If you're coming in. We don't want you to feel like, oh, well, I didn't get a chance to make those choices. Nope, it starts fresh and it's a clean slate for everyone. New goal for everyone. The goal is, survive and build a home in an alien galaxy, period, full stop.
Yeah, but just there's probably side quests where some characters will mention, oh, the Battle of the Citadel, remember that crazy stuff? Things like that.
Well, yeah, like I said, hints and nods. We'll have those throughout.
Gotcha. Josiah21 has a fantastically nerdy question that I hope you're into. It says, whereas the original Mass Effect trilogy was more akin to Star Wars in its ongoing story and epic threats, would the development team consider Andromeda to be more like Star Trek in its episodic nature of finding a new home for humanity?
That's a really good question. I think, we are still very much in the vein of the epic space opera that, Star Wars was and that the trilogy was. I do think one of the things that we've changed, and I don't know how to compare between the two of them, is this is a game about exploration ultimately, which, sure, I mean, obviously boldly go and explore new planets and new locations. That's very Star Trek. But more importantly for us was, the beginning of the trilogy within, we'll call it 90 seconds, starts with, everything gets wiped out every 50,000 years. The stakes have been set up really, really high at this point. And while we want there to be high stakes in this game, it's hard to sort of create these very high stakes and then say, but don't worry about that, just go explore. Just go have fun exploring. They kind of fight each other. So I think there is, and that's where the adventurous, youthful tone comes in. We want this to be a fun adventure, a fun opportunity for players to feel like, yeah, you know what I want to do right now is just go explore this planet, and I don't want to have to worry about anything else. And so we've created a scenario where that works. Obviously the stakes are high, but I think the stakes aren't as high, and the time sensitive nature of it doesn't feel like it's always sort of just looming over top of you like it was in the trilogy in some ways.
Gotcha. McFly616 says, Miko Wolf says, arcs and the Nexus in Andromeda have to be really fast, even by Mass Effect standards, to reach Andromeda in mere centuries. And he's wondering if it uses Reaper tech at all, because he mentions the red ending, mentioned that it'll take centuries for races to reach each other, even within the Milky Way galaxy. And that's without relays. So how fast are these arcs and Nexus? How does that work?
So we will get into the details of that. In fact, I think some of it might have just come up in our Arcs and Nexus sort of online reveal. So people should check that out for sure if they want to go to the website and see what it's about. But we'll also talk about the science of it more, in the Codex entries in the game and how they did it. Obviously, we wanted it to fit within the timeline of the universe. You didn't want to distance it too much. So you'll see. The science will explain it as it does.
Okay. Willie wants to know, why is PB the Asari so different from Liara? What makes them different?
Oh, what makes them different?
Yeah.
That's a different question than why is she different. I think one of the things that we looked at earlier on was, how do you create new characters who have to represent potentially new species for people who haven't played before, but also don't retread all the same ground that we've looked at in the trilogy for people who have played. And one of the tricks that you can do there, call it a trick if you want, is you kind of create characters who are almost the antithesis of what their species sort of involves. So then we have a character who you learn about the Asari by the opposite of everything that they would do, right? And that's not exactly where PB lands, but she is not a very archetypical Asari. And I think that was one of the ways that we just decided to sort of approach that, which was, hey, if we were going to make someone who, is clearly Asari, but also in very much everything she stands for, not Asari, and allows us to explain what the Asari, sort of culture is like through that, then that's a great way to go.
That's interesting. So that applies to other characters as well? Is it a common trick just to be like, well, the Krogan are the Krogan, but it's more interesting to have a Krogan with a heart of gold that's a little bit softer because it reveals more about the race and the character?
I think there's elements of that in some of the characters. PB is probably the apex of that. She's the one that represents that the most. We sort of just because of who her character ended up being and the way we pushed it, I think she embodies that the most. But you'll see elements of that in some of the other characters as well. Just so we don't have to explain. Well, Solarians are this and and it's like, well, that just feels like a character I've already seen before. We want them to be unique and fun and interesting for both the new players, but also, of course, for players who've gone through hundreds of hours on the trilogy.
Yeah. So just knowing the Asari, does that mean PB is just less regal, less sophisticated? Is that an easy shorthand?
I think she would call herself. Yeah, she would agree with those. I don't know if she'd say less sophisticated. She's just less concerned with the things that concern Asaris, right? So she's a free spirit, very much sort of out there on her own.
Gotcha. The name PB, I feel like we asked 1,000 questions on the trip and it never really came up. Is there a good etymology behind this name?
It's a short form for her full name, which we'll reveal in the future.
Okay, a long, complicated Asari name.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it just speaks to her character name. She's just like, who needs a big long name like this? Just call me PB.
Gotcha. Charagon77 says, will the understanding of the new alien languages be explained?
As in, how do you, human, come to a new galaxy and understand those?
That's exactly it.
Yes, that will be explained.
Okay. Is it something that you guys talked a lot, even on the original trilogy, about should the mouths be out of sync?
We kind of mention it. There's kind of like this sense of there is a translator, but there's also sort of an intergalactic standard. We kind of have both of those things mentioned in the trilogy. Going to a new galaxy, I think there are new tricks and tools that you need, and that will be explained how we do that. So
gotcha. Sobin wants to know, will we see females amongst the Ket or other species that are encountered in Andromeda?
Well, one of the questions I got was early on about male and females on Twitter, and actually, for every species that will be represented in Andromeda, if there are multiple genders, the multiple genders are both represented.
Yeah,
so that's as close as I can give to that answer. So, if there's a Turian, you'll see male and female Turians. If there's Solarians, you'll see male and female Solarians. If a species has male and females, you will see male and female. Yeah,
at the Game Awards, I saw you announced a new party member, which is a female Turian, which fans have been dying to see for a very, very long time.
Yep. Vetra. She's a lot of fun. But the interesting thing is her and PB. Just wait until you see that relationship blossom.
Blossom in a hostile sort of way?
Oh, play the game.
Okay, interesting. Tomb Raider says, or wants to know, will the Krogans in Andromeda be cured of the genophage, especially considering that they left before the events of Mass Effect 3?
Right. They will. Nothing has changed about the state of the Krogan before they left. However, it is something that we will address going forward. And again, that's one that you'll probably want to just play the game and find out how we did that.
For sure. You mentioned on the cover story trip that like old rivalries and old issues will still be coming up amongst the races. So I'd imagine that's one that's there's still some discussions to be had between Solarians and Krogan.
Oh yeah, yesterday we did the announce for the novels, and you'll notice that the first novel coming out is called Uprising. I wonder who was Uprising. I wonder what happened there. That just speaks to, there are these existing sort of relationships, expectations from the different species and animosities, and when things go pear-shaped, which they often do when you travel to another galaxy. Those tensions flare, and then people start looking out for themselves, and as we've seen in the original trilogy, a lot of times people then go back to what they know, which is, well, I'm going to trust the people who are like me, and screw the people who aren't like me, right? So I think we'll start the world is set up very much so that by the time you arrive as the human pathfinder, there's already a story being told. It's not just, hey, everyone wake up and let's go there. There's already things in place and in action. Like even in the gameplay trailer, you got to see Sloan, who, if you pay attention to some of the things online, you'll also realize was sort of a security officer in charge of the Nexus, which is one of the ships that went out with the Arcs. What's she doing on a planet, and how has she established herself in this position already? What happened there, right? Like, so there's already things that have been underway before you even get there.
Gotcha. Lou 4 just has a simple question, but are there Quarians?
Not talking about that just yet.
Okay, but there are other races on the Nexus than we've seen. It was able to carry a lot of different races, right? That's the idea?
The idea with the Nexus was that, unlike the Arcs, it was a multi-species effort. And because it's more of the idea with the Nexus is it's more of a sort of a supply station in a central location, sort of like our Citadel in the trilogy.
Right.
The Arcs, more for physiological reasons, and just the effort of developing them, more species centric. As you can imagine, if you're going to put a bunch of Solarians into cryo sleep, you might have different requirements than if you're just to put a bunch of humans in. That said, the support crews for the individual arcs can be multi-species as well, but they're very small and represent a small portion of the people on each arc.
Gotcha. So Spiritual 7 says, will Andromeda have native controller support for the PC version?
Yes, we get a lot that question. I've answered that question a lot, and now I'll answer it again.
Perfect.
It sure will.
Fred DVDP says, how much care is being put into the mouse and keyboard control scheme? Mass Effect 2 and 3 had the infamous spacebar does everything design, and Dragon Age Inquisition had tons of tiny problems. How much do you guys talk about mouse and keyboard?
It comes up a lot. We've been doing a lot of testing on it. It's funny, just in general, if anybody wants a little tip into how game development works, the control schemes for both the controllers, the mouse, keyboard, it's probably one of the things that changes most frequently. Like, you can get a weekly email going, yep, controllers changed again. And really that's just because we're focus testing things as we get, we've added new abilities, new powers. You've got the scanner now. Where does it fit on a controller? How do we use it? And we do a lot of focus testing as well. So as new feedback comes in, we're just kind of iterating and changing on it. So control schemes in general for the last year, they've been changing almost weekly as we try out new things and move back to it. You'd think it would be very straightforward, very simple. There's certain things that are, obviously aiming and shooting. Everybody knows how that's going to work, looking with the camera, movement. But then everything else is kind of like, what do people gravitate towards most? What do they use the most? What's the best flow for everything? So long answer is that. The short answer is we talk about it a lot.
Great.
And we test it a lot.
The penultimate wants to know, will there be a day-night cycle on the different planets? And if yes, will it dictate what kind of encounters you might meet based on the time of day?
No, we don't have day-night cycles per se. I will say this, though, there are different states for some of the planets.
Interesting. Jehan says, is there anything in Andromeda that you would compare to the suicide mission from Mass Effect 2 in terms of scope or technical achievement? Is there anything that monumental of a task is pulling off that suicide mission?
Yeah, well, I think again, we've said that there is a critical path main story for this, and we wanted it to feel like it had the appropriate level of stakes. I don't think it's the same in that, from the get-go in Mass Effect 2, you knew it was a suicide mission. I mean, the Elusive Man's telling you, well, it's a suicide mission. Go collect your guys. And that had a certain definite tone and flavor to it, just calling something a suicide mission. But we took some things from that, including, loyalty missions, but also just how different people can come and aid you in sort of a final sort of conflict, let's call it, based off the decisions you made in the game. And not just the narrative decisions you made in the game, but the gameplay decisions you've made as well. So that's one thing that we're kind of working for the ending in Andromeda.
Okay. But it's a complex ending. Is that fair to say?
It is a complex ending, but also try to think, I don't how best to frame it. I think it is a big, bold ending, much like Mass Effect 1 was, but it's got a bit more variation, more akin to Mass Effect 2 in it, based off of how you've played.
All right,
that's what I would say.
A Matuha wants to know: should we keep our Mass Effect Andromeda saves?
I don't think it would hurt to keep them. Right now, I'll be honest, we are focused on this game, and as I've said to people before, we very much think of Andromeda as a series. What we do with that series is, TBD at this point. I think right now, we know, and the other thing I've said is we know we don't want it to be a trilogy in the sense of we're planning this, 3-part story in 3 games. But that said, key elements like the Pathfinders, even the riders themselves, those are things that are going to make another appearance in the next game. So.
It's got to be a confusing thing to message, and I'm wondering if you could just clarify it a little bit. The idea of, maybe your saves will carry forward. We're not sure yet. Is it design-wise not sure, technical not sure, or you just don't want to talk about the idea of moving forward?
I think it's more vision-wise. We're not locking in on that vision yet. From a technical perspective, I'm not too worried about that. We've learned how to do that on the previous trilogy.
Yeah, so. I'd imagine. Booger X99, good old-fashioned name, says, will there still be a Codex in Andromeda, and will it be narrated?
There'll definitely be a Codex. At this point, we're not planning to narrate it, basically because it is so big. And the reason it's big is because we've taken forward a lot of the Codex entries from the original trilogy. And of course, now you're in a brand new galaxy, and we have to add Codex entries to that as well. And also, it was just one of the technical constraints of one of the things we were doing. That said, the codexes are full, and I would say even more full than previous games. And they even evolve a little bit more over time as well for some of them, because obviously this is a story of discovery, right? As you first find let's call it a new planet or something like that. Well, you don't necessarily know what it is, but maybe you learn what it is later.
Yeah. Jay Cruz says, is the name of your ship a reference to the historic Tempest that was converted to a steamer, or to Shakespeare's play?
Actually, it was just the Nomad, the Tempest, the Hyperion are all sort of taken from a similar sort of Greek mythos kind of idea, Greek Roman mythos in there, and we just wanted to kind of keep them consistent in there, which is why we went with that.
Is it? I don't know. Are there any overlaps between the story of Andromeda and the Odyssey? Was that a common reference point for you guys?
Maybe subconsciously.
Okay.
I did read the Odyssey a few times in university, so yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Jared Rosow says, will there be Tempest customization or other ways to personalize your intimate surroundings in Andromeda?
Yeah, there will definitely be customization without getting too much into the details. Our fans like to be able to customize. We'll be talking more about, what specifically you can customize and to what degree in the future.
Okay. R. Rager Daggard says, Mass Effect was very heavily influenced and inspired by the designs of Sid Mead and the synth scores of sci-fi from the 70s and 80s. Will this trend continue, or is there another aesthetic to the Andromeda team that you're aiming for?
Oh, well, I mean, no, we've established a very clear aesthetic, and we wanted to maintain that. I don't think we want to diverge from that. So especially when you see anything that is built back in the Milky Way or built by the Milky Way species, it's going to look familiar, updated, and that's what the Andromeda Initiative allows us to do. It allows us to do something fresh, a little bit new, but we want to maintain those clean arcs and the things that inspired us from the trilogy. And same with the music. What I would say is the thing I often say is, if you actually watch a lot of sci-fi between, in the last 5 years, call it, you hear a lot of things that arguably are inspired by Mass Effect and the music that we had in the trilogy. And so one of the things we have to do is to, hang on to the spirit of what Mass Effect was, but also, since other people have kind of taken what we've done and added their own thing to it, we now need to leapfrog ahead and find our version of the Mass Effect soundtrack, which carries a lot of the same spirit and tone that the original did, but also brings it forward, 10 plus years into the future. So that, it's a sci-fi game. You want it to feel a little bit more cutting edge, right? So it can't be too self-referential on that.
Interesting. How is the soundtrack coming along? Are you at the point where you can sit back in your bedroom and listen to the full soundtrack?
It's interesting. The process we're using now, we will have a full soundtrack in the end, but actually the way we're doing the music system is unique to how we've done it before. So a lot of times tracks come in and they're not meant to be, how do I explain this? So there's cinematic tracks that we would tie to a cinematic, and they're fully scored. So those ones you can listen to. But a lot of the ones that happen in the rest of the game are actually designed to sort of be broken apart so that you can take elements of them and use them. And some of it is sort of scripted by people, but a lot of it's actually procedural. So it's like, well, what's happening right now? What should happen? So the whole, the larger pieces aren't necessarily, we listen to them for approval purposes and to make sure, yeah, this is totally what we want. But that's not necessarily how it will play in the game, right? So,
right.
But there eventually, as we get all the cutscenes scored and everything like that, then those will probably be because that'll have like your main theme throughout it, and those will be the ones that people remember. Then we will definitely have that soundtrack.
Gotcha. Cooldude26 is wondering, what's your favorite sci-fi movie?
Oh, that's a good question. My favorite sci-fi movie. I always pause on these because it changes. I'm a waffler. I change. You can't. I saw Star Wars when I was, fairly young. I won't say how young, but and despite all, you look back on it now and it's just like, oof, yeah, it's it doesn't necessarily hold up. It's just hard not to be in love with it, just because of nostalgia. And I don't know if anything's ever beat it for that. I've watched the new ones. I like the new ones, but I go back to the originals all the time.
Is it tough being so absorbed in Mass Effect's world for so long? Because I imagine every sci-fi movie you watch, you're constantly thinking, oh, that's a really interesting idea. Maybe we can incorporate something like that. Or I wonder if they got that from Mass Effect. Is it just all sci-fi now is viewed through the Mass Effect lens for you?
Sci-fi is kind of interesting that way because it's very broad, right? Like I don't look at Interstellar and take too much away from it because it was trying to do something different. And I don't look at Guardians of the Galaxy too much because, it was obviously on the total other end of the spectrum. But are there aspects of those that I sometimes look at and go, oh yeah, that'd be great. We should pull that in. Yep, for sure. But it doesn't necessarily make it difficult or ruin it for me. I was trying to think if there was another good example in there of something that drew my eye, but no, not really.
Well, look at like even Oblivion, like you have the vehicle designer from Oblivion and Tron working on Andromeda, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's true. Certainly you look for opportunities if there's things that we can do like that to sort of, make something fresh and new. Like I was talking about before, like we really want to sort of leapfrog things ahead by 10 years. Look at what other movies are doing or what other games are doing and improve that. That's just part of our ambition though, and our passion, right? We're always looking to not just one up other people, but one up ourselves.
Yeah. So the DJ Bixo has the most crucial question here. Who would win in the dancing competition, Shepard or Ryder?
At this point, it would be Shepard.
Okay. Were you guys surprised?
Too many years of experience.
I totally understand. Were you surprised by how much the dancing caught on and to the point where you have to have a lot of dancing conversations about Andromeda?
Well, yes. Yes and no. We always put those things in because we kind of, find them humorous or we like them. And I guess it's not surprising that the fans also, then sort of latch onto them and make them their own. And that's great if we can have those moments to put in something fun like that. And yeah.
Right
It's
on.
great. Fills out the universe.
Yeah, for sure. So with the gameplay trailer you guys unveiled at the Game Awards, there were a lot of details in there. Fans have gone through frame by frame. The
Mhm.
word Angara's in there. A lot of people are asking about that. I assume you're not talking about it. But
No.
what is the debate like amongst the team as far as how many Easter eggs and secrets can we put in there? Do you guys comb through the trailer frame by frame to make sure ahead of time that the right amount of teasing is going on?
We take it very seriously for sure. I mean, when we're going through it, we want to make sure that we are showing what we would want people to see at this time. Because I mean, again, and I know this might not be the most popular thing. I believe a lot of the things that um, you know are in the game should be experienced by playing the game, not by us telling you about what's going to be in there. It's like you're not going to fall in love with a character or decide who you want to romance because we tell you they're a romance option. I don't think it's going to be because you play the characters, play the game, and then meet the characters and go, well, that's a character I really want to romance. And so for me, it's more about wanting to make sure that we show just the right amount. So because I mean, the fans deserve to see what we're up to and what we're working on, but I don't want to get so caught up in the details that it's just like, you know what, that really isn't something that's better experienced just by handing controller in the hand, playing the game.
Yeah. So we should expect more of a focus on the environment and the scope of the worlds moving forward than specific characters and lore stuff building up to launch.
We'll have some of that, of course. We've still got a lot planned, but it's just about. And then I think that's the other part is, we've still got a ways to go to spring. We don't want to show everything right now because then we've got nothing to talk about for the next number of months.
Yeah, for sure. So you guys just in a polishing phase? What are you working on these days?
Oh, it's polish. It's right now. It's 100% polish. Polish and balance is the word I use. So, if it's multiplayer or gameplay or some of our systems like progression or crafting, those are things that we're constantly balancing. A lot of those things that right now are almost data driven to a degree behind the scenes. So you just play it, you play it, get a bunch of feedback from people, and you go, okay, we're just tweak it a little bit this way, tweak it a little bit that way. It's a lot of those things are just minor increments or changes to and fro. And then like the cutscenes and characters, those all get polished. They always are very. They tend to be late because all of our character scenes are done in game. They're not pre-rendered, right? Our characters, because you can change the way you look, you can change who you bring with you. We can't pre-render that. We don't have a way to do that. So it's all done in the game, which means the levels have to be done, the lighting has to be done, the actual character models all have to be where they're at. And then obviously you have to once all that settles down, then you can actually get in and work on your scene and polish it and work on it. So that's just typically in a BioWare game. Those are the things that come last and late.
Yeah, right on. Well, hey, that's it for community questions. Is there anything else you wanted to get off your chest? Anything you wanted to clarify from our month of coverage? Anything like that?
No, I had the month of coverage was fantastic. I love the questions that people have brought here today, just be patient. We're all heads down on the game, trying to make it amazing, and we'll be making sure that we get information out to the fans as often as we are able to do.
Right on. Really appreciate your time, Mac. Thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you very much.
And there it is. So thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Game Informer Show. We have regular episodes that go up every Thursday that cover, reviews of the biggest games. We talk about previews. We talk about cover story trips, exclusive impressions of games that we've seen on the horizon. So definitely check out the regular show if you're a Mass Effect fan that just tuned in for this one episode. And we think you'll enjoy it. But until next Thursday, the next episode of the Game Informer Show, we'll see ya.